English society is still very class-based. You could make that argument about the U.S. However, compared to traditional English society, the class-based stratification is still very much part of the larger social structure. And I mention that because social structures have a lot to do with the way punishment is distributed. But let's get back to the execution block. Things to do. You've heard me say this for the past few episodes. The CLINK is a storytelling institution. So we have a bit of a brief story about Anne Boleyn and the expert swordsman brought in from France. We also had a story about Nigel, the Rat Man. We have these narratives that provide a vehicle, a cultural vehicle for transmitting the knowledge of how punishment is performed and how it is distributed. Back to performance. Get the audience, get the penal tourists, get the visitors to perform, to go along with the script. And here is the script. Things to do. Put your head on the block and have your photo taken. Ha ha ha, very funny. Do people do that at the CLINK? They most certainly do. Do they get a nice laugh out of it? Yes, they do. Things to do. How would you try to ensure that the axe was sharp? Back to social class. In the run-up to the execution, which was publicly displayed, oftentimes well-to-do families would tip, would provide gratuity to the swordsman, the executioner, give him a little bit extra financial incentive to go back and sharpen that sword, sharpen that axe, to make sure that their loved one who was to be executed would die instantaneously, without a lot of hacking and a lot of struggling along the way. All right? Let us continue as we get closer to the end of this tour. And here you're saying, I can finally sit down and rest my feet. Being a tourist is very exhausting, and I finally found a place to sit. Well, if you choose to sit in this chair, you should be well aware that this is a torture chair. Notice on the back of the chair is a chain, and at the very top you should notice there is an eyelet, a metal ring. And the execution chair was part of a larger performance of inflicting pain and agony on the victim. The torturer was very skilled at his art, his craft. Oftentimes they had European-wide reputations, where they would be hired in France and Germany and back to England and so on and so forth. The victim would be confined to the chair. He or she would have their wrists attached to the arms and the ankles attached to the legs, and then oftentimes there was a belt around the midsection. And the torturer would pull tightly the victim to make the victim's body very snug into the form of the chair. Then the torturer, is a very strong bloke indeed, would then lift the chair and attach the ringlet to a hook on the wall. And then he would tip the chair forward. We've all heard of being on the edge of your seat. Well, this is the origin of that particular phrase. Once on the edge of one's seat, the torturer would then explain to his victim the procedure. He would show the instruments, which was part of the ritual. And oftentimes, his favorite tool of torture was the tongue pullers. And he would explain that he was going to put this contraption into the victim's mouth, get a hold of the tongue, and snap, pull the tongue out. That's the torture chair. Now you notice off to the right-hand side is a machine with a red button. You might recall the foreshadowing remark at the very beginning of this tour of the CLINK, episode 1, that instructed visitors that they would get a free photograph with paid entrance. They would read the instructions here, they would sit in the chair, and the camera is across the room, and once the visitor pushed the button, it would activate a camera. Presto, one gets their own personal photograph. But how did they retrieve the photograph? Well, they read the instructions, and it is the following. Press the red button, take the ticket, and the ticket has a number on it. They go online, they register, and they then download their own photograph. So they go full circle from the CLINK being a medieval dungeon to one that is postmodern, perhaps even futuristic in its technology. And this is the CLINK. As we wrap up, as you will read in your book, Escape to Prison, we're just scratching the surface. Obviously, today we spent the day in London. We've got other cities to visit. Sydney, Australia, Down Under, Melbourne, Buenos Aires. We're going to go to South Africa, South Korea, and a few other cities around the world. So that's it. That's the CLINK. It's been enjoyable talking about my field work, sharing it with you. Hope you enjoy it. Hope you enjoy the book. And we've got more episodes to follow. Cheers.